Okay. Okay, is it streaming, Hussein? How are y'all feeling?
I took a fat nap and I just woke up.
Yeah, I played a little bit of gaming just now, so I'm chilling. Cool.
Test.
What? Test?
Test? Okay, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So, JavaScript, React Native, software, no longer software testing. JavaScript and React Native all in one today. We're not doing software testing. So do you want to do this?
Oh, yeah, so again, we apologize for some of these late workshop notices. Like for the most part, we're still very new to team management at this kind of scope. Like normally we're just managing our own club officers, which is normally at most like 7 officers at a time for only one meeting. But now we're up to like 23 people for various meetings throughout the week. So like, yeah, so we are very grateful for a lot of y'all's patience and flexibility here. But let's see. But yeah, if for whatever reason any of our workshops don't fit with your schedule here and there, there's always the catch-up guidance on the team charter for you guys to refer to there. But yeah, it could be a little bit of a tough choice for us sometimes, like in terms of like convenience and like how many people would be able to come to some meetings or not be able to come to some other meetings. But yeah, a little bit of choices there. But yes, now that we have everybody on the Teams thing, things should be a bit more planned further ahead. Did you guys get to touch upon like the team stuff?
The teams.
Yeah, in case some people accidentally filled it out as the one to meet instead of the Outlook/Teams way. Because on one to meet, they normally put in the times that they're available, but on Outlook, people put their time in.
I forgot to mention that. Nee was there too. I'm sorry. Yeah, I completely forgot. Yeah, well, we should send out a reminder later on Discord.
Okay. I could take care of that later.
Okay, cool. So yeah, really apologize. 24 different schedules to line up.
Yeah.
So we do have to make some tough choices. But again, we try to maximize folks' availability. So even y'all being here, just being flexible with us, we really appreciate it, right? So with that being said, let's move on to some topics to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to work with the command line and just understanding how to work that with your operating system. Honestly, these are things that are not very well discussed in terms of software development. So I'm going to give y'all the secrets now, but only the basics. And then after that, we'll go over some stuff in JavaScript. You're going to learn about these specifics, like this special JavaScript stuff. I'm coming with the assumption that y'all have an okay idea of just how different other programming languages work in terms of like for loops and variables and whatnot. But we'll just look at stuff the JavaScript way. And then using the stuff we learned, we will go over just how React works, which will be pretty complicated, as you probably have heard from folks in the last session. And then React Native, which dives in even further. And for that reason, it's likely that we probably can't even get to software tests today, but yeah, we'll be focusing on React Native. Everything will lead to those two topics, right? So first, let's talk about CLI and operating system stuff. So how many of y'all have heard of command line interfaces, CLIs? Oh, cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, the numbers last meeting was about like half and half, which is pretty good, but yeah, I don't expect a lot of people to just understand what CLIs are at the get-go. So let's kind of break down what these things are. Did I press back button? Okay, yeah. Cool. So basically, a CLI is a program to a program. So like, basically, think of your regular programs, and then there are ways to talk to your computer. I guess another thing to talk about is, do y'all know what a shell is by chance? Have y'all talked about that in class a bit? Okay, so basically, so you know how like you see all the graphical stuff on your computer, right? How does that even talk to your operating system? In the very, like under all the prettiness, how does it actually talk to your computer? That would be with your CLI, the command line, right? So basically, CLIs are programs that exist on top of the shell, and the shell is basically a communication medium from us, really, to the OS, which sounds really vague. But the reason why there's a whole concept of a shell is because for every operating system, there's multiple shells. Like for example, on Windows, y'all probably already met two. So one of them is the command line, cmd.exe, and then the other is PowerShell, PowerShell.exe. So those are two different ways of talking to Windows, right? And then in Linux or the Unix world, there's Bash, there's Z Shell, there's Fish, right? So those are three different ways of talking to your operating system. And whenever y'all installed NVM and you had to do all that configuration, you're essentially making sure that your shell is properly set up to talk with your operating system. Did that make sense? In terms of the shell stuff? A little bit? Okay, good. So building on shells, right? There are a bunch of CLIs or command line interfaces that exist on top of shells. So these are basically programs that just run on your command line. So they're not graphical, but they're completely text-based. And the way they work is that you go by programs. So for example, Git is a program. If you're a Mac, Brew is a program. If you were installing NVM, NVM itself is a program. Chocolate tea is a program, right? And then all the stuff after that command. So for example, chocolate tea install, NVM install, brew install. That is an example of command. So brew is a program, install is a command, right? If you're on Ubuntu, you would do apt get install. Apt get is the program, and install is the command, right? And there's multiple different kinds of commands, like remove, update, delete, all sorts of things. Right? In this case, fetch, origin. So commands can be changed multiple times. But the idea is that all of this together is to be specific, right? So I specifically want to do this action to the operating system. I specifically want to do this thing. That's what the whole purpose of it is. So to be specific, you have commands, and then you have arguments to make this command to this program more specific. And then if you want to be even more specific, you want to add an option. So for example, def equals 10, main equals hello, only use this file or whatever, right? So usually these things are filtering options or just switches that you turn on and off for the CLI or program that behaves certain ways. But you can imagine this to be kind of like a switchboard, like with knobs and buttons that you press to get something, to get the operating system to work, except you're kind of typing it out, right? Did that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, so the next thing we'll be talking about is just what is a JavaScript ecosystem, and then what is it in the greater context of like package management, right? So first I want to talk about how familiar are y'all with JavaScript? Not familiar a lot? Okay, cool. So basically JavaScript exists in two worlds, right? The first world is completely in your browser. So originally JavaScript was intended only for the browser actually, but somebody came along and said, no, I kind of wish this programming language was not in the browser. So some folks out there actually made it offline that can be run locally on your computer without internet, without browser. And what that is basically Node.js. Node.js is JavaScript that doesn't run in your web browser. And they are two very different. They're still the same programming language. They still behave similarly, but they are believed and coded differently, basically. So it's very important to keep that difference in mind, and I'll show you one of the largest differences ever that we'll do together as an exercise. The other thing that we need to talk about are package managers. So how many of y'all have worked with package managers before? Okay, good. Okay, Ryan's the expert here. So, you know how you usually have to find a program to install it? Like, oh, I have to find Chrome. Oh, I have to find this program to install it. Like, you have to go through this crazy process, right? Developers, we hate that. We would rather just type out root install program, chocolatey install NVM, chocolatey install Node, chocolatey install Chrome. Like, just type it out, get it out there for me. Stop asking me to install stuff. Stop having me like find all these things. The worst part, honestly, as developers, is just that some programs need another program, and that program needs that program, and another program needs all the 50 different other programs. And in a traditional sense, like let's say in the ancient times, we would have to manually like install all those programs and list out all those dependencies. But we have package managers. When you have a package manager, whenever you press install, it installs that program and all of its dependencies, right? So then you're basically just installing the program. You're not thinking about, hey, it needs that program, like all these things. You're not thinking about that. You're just installing that program, right? So it's convenient because you can install programs really fast and set up environments really quickly. That's why people in Linux love it. They're like, oh my god, we're so much better than Windows users because we have a package manager. But recently, Windows have developed their own, so I guess they're catching up to the party. But anyways, just to give y'all a picture of a package manager, by the way, they don't exist just as operating systems. So there are operating system programs, and then there are programs that exist for programming languages, which sounds really wild. But just to give y'all context, there are package managers per programming language. So for example, for JavaScript, there's something called npm. For Python, there's pip. And then for something like Java, there's something called Maven, right? So every programming language has their package manager. For C# it's NuGet. So like there's just one for pretty much all programming languages. It's a really big deal. But they do the same thing. They just serve the task of installing programs, right? You want to install TensorFlow, you pip install TensorFlow. You want to install React, npm install React, right? So it's stuff like that. To give y'all a visual what the entirety of a package manager looks like, that's what this here is. I can talk about one of these things. So underscore is a library that a lot of JavaScript people love. Underscore is just like, we're so lazy, like we don't want to implement all these utility functions. Isn't there someone up there that did it all for us already? That's underscore. A bunch of library authors love underscore because they already does a bunch of things for them. So what they just do is they include it as a dependency, and everything that relies on underscore kind of branches out. It's one of the biggest libraries out there. So that's the explanation for why this here is so big. But you can see all the dependencies connect to each other. So you all understand at least a little bit of package managers. Y'all just did a little bit of it. Whenever y'all did npm install, that was similar to package management. So, and then just using Chocolatey or Brew, that was definitely package management. You will find yourself installing a lot of programs that you think of. If you have Brew, I can pretty much install every single app I've always wanted using Brew. I don't even have to go connect to Chrome or anything, just type it all out. Right? Cool. So the next thing we'll be talking about are environment variables. How many of y'all have heard of environment variables? Oh, dang, impressive. Ryan, dang. Actually, for the last session, no one knew what they were, which is really good. Environment variables are arguably one of the most not talked about things, not talked enough things.
Aren't they punished for in class?
What?
If you program in C with an environment, global variables.
Global variables, environment variables. That's a really good thing to talk about though. What's the difference between global variables and environment variables? Global variables are just in code, they just exist in the global scope, which means that they're accessible anywhere in code, right? But environment variables go one step further. They're accessible throughout the entire operating system. So you have multiple programming languages, they can access the same environment variable, right? This is OS level variables. So really important things that are environment variables are API keys, deeply hidden secrets, things that should only exist on your computer, nowhere else. A lot of people love to put their, hey, we're doing a development environment here, we're doing a production environment, we're just setting other configuration variables that should exist at the environment level. One really big one that y'all probably secretly always run into, but probably don't realize it, is the path environment variable. So path represents all of the command line that literally every single CLI that you can run. So the only, like, to even be able to type stuff out in your command line or your terminal, you need that path variable to tell the OS where those programs are installed, right? So that's one that you definitely work with low key, but it's a really big one, right? It works across programming languages. There's one for each, so you can access. There's ways to access it via JavaScript. There's ways for Python, ways for Java. Every programming language has their own way of getting access to environment variables. But mostly what they're there for is just to give a little bit of context to what that program is supposed to do. Like, hey, this is actually only a development side of things. Please don't do this in production. It's very important whenever you set this up on the cloud. Basically, people use this all the time in the cloud. That's why it's not discussed enough. In my company, we used it a lot, so it's kind of a low-key secret. That's why I kind of propose a challenge to y'all. If y'all could like do a little bit of research and just post up on Discord what y'all find about environment variables, it will be beneficial for everybody on board, especially whoever's researching it. Especially on how to set environment variables. It's different by Windows, but you should learn how to set it via CLI. There's a bunch of ways to set it. I'll just let y'all discover the magic. And you will discover some of the magic as we code together as well. All right. So I guess let's do our mini exercise in terms of seeing the difference between browser, JavaScript, and Node.js. So I want y'all to pull up y'all's terminals. Let's go. It's big. Okay. And I want y'all to type out, actually, wait, terminal later. Open up a web browser of your choice. Right now we're using Chrome because it's easy. But what y'all want to do is y'all want to go to more tools. You want to open up your developer tools, basically, right? So one thing I want y'all to type out in your web browser is window, right? And just press enter. So let me know, give me a thumbs up whenever y'all are at this point. So open up your developer console and then select console on the top bar and then type out window and then just press enter. All right, let me know when everyone's good. Okay, cool. Now I want us to go inside of your terminal and then just type out node and then press enter. And then give me a thumbs up whenever we're here. Oh, getting a head start. Okay, we good. Preston, you good? All right, let me walk in. Oh yeah, you only need. Yeah. Are you able to open up your command line to node? Okay. So basically, you want to open up your command line. So this is either, well, really, you want to just scan that. So now you want to type out node. Okay, cool. And then you're in. Nice job. For which, how to get to the developer console?
Yeah.
Okay. So, usually, if you're using Chrome or something, and if you're using another browser, you go to your developer and then you just click on developer tools here. Or the standard way is just to click your triple dots, and then you want to go to more tools, and then you want to go to developer tools. So you catch that right here. So now you should be able to, you should see a bunch of options, but you want to select console. And then from console, you want to type out window. Yeah. So, you good there?
Oh, window.
Yeah, window. Yeah, just window, not windows, just window. And if that should return something for y'all, right? Okay. knowing that this is a thing is a very big deal. Very, very big deal, right? Because when I want y'all to type it out, the same thing, just type out window in Node. And, I was going to ask y'all, but it would return, oh well. As you can tell, if y'all type it on y'all's Node, it should return this. So why is this such a big deal? Because it just goes to show what the biggest difference is between the two. So one has stuff for the browser, the other doesn't. Window in the browser represents this entire thing, this entire window object, right? Locally in Node.js, that doesn't exist. So it's fundamentally different. A lot of people, if you go on Stack Overflow and just look up stuff and you see all these differences between Node and browser, it can be really confusing. It's really important to know the difference between the two, especially in the context of React. Some people reference window when in React. For example, you're doing server-side rendering. You're like, why can't I do this window thing? It's because you're on a server. You're coding in Node.js. You're not coding on a browser, so you don't have access to the window nor its APIs, right? So it's a really important distinction to understand that their JavaScript is kind of split in that way, and whenever you're trying to learn for it, you got to be aware of that, right? There will be things that you think are like, why can't they just do that? Because maybe one is for a browser, one is for Node, right? One common thing is the require function. This doesn't exist in the browser, right? And that one is very widely used in Node. Okay, with that being said, let's continue to more things. All right, so before we go on, did everything up to CLI and operating systems just make sense to y'all? Okay, I would highly recommend to do a little bit more research, especially in the environment variables part, and just learning how to play with CLIs, but yeah. You're gonna find yourself working with these things all the time, right? All right, so on to talking about the big manual in the root of JavaScript. So let's talk about some things that we'll specifically cover. So these are, again, these specifics. So the first thing we'll cover are variables, which are very weird in JavaScript, and then types, which are even weirder. And then we'll go over objects, which are some of the most ambiguous things ever in JavaScript because there's multiple ways to even call something an object. And then we'll go over the basics of functions. It would be ideal to do a deep dive on functions, modules, and functional programming, but those three are a hot topic in JavaScript. They're widely debated and fussed about. So there's a lot of resources in terms of exploring what these three things are, but we'll go over just the basics of those things, just so y'all get introduced to the idea. Okay, cool. So the first thing we'll be talking about are variables and types in JavaScript, right? So I feel like it's better if we just play around rather than me giving a direct lecture over it. So let's get back to the coding editor. And the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna exit. And we want to make a playground folder for JavaScript just to play with our code, right? So let's make that playground folder. So for me, I'm gonna go in my documents. I'm gonna go in my code folder. I'm gonna go in my school, and then I'll make a directory called workshop app playground, right? And now I should be going inside of that folder. And I am here. All right, so basically navigate to this folder and definitely let me know if you need help with trying to get that navigation there. Y'all good? Brian, you good? Brian, you good?
I got something and then.
Okay, so for me, I have my own folder structure, but you should go with whatever is on your computer. So if you have a code folder, you should go in there. Or if you want to just make a folder anywhere you want, just make one right now.
Yeah.
Workshop app playground. So to make a new folder, the command line, the CLI, to get it done is called make directory. I'm going to type out make directory and then give it a name. So this name is a command, right? This is a program. Marika? Oh. Yeah, that's a return, so you can CD into it. By the way, you don't have to make a folder about it too. You can always make folders same way you just make a folder, which may be faster. Yep, you're in there. Good job. You can tell where you are, or if CD worked, if you can see that you are in the right spot over there. All right, cool. Is everybody at this point? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. So now we want to open up our coding editor here. So if you are using just a regular text editor, like in your command terminal, make a new file right here. But if you're using VS Code like I am, do this, code dot, and that will open up VS Code, right? And now I am inside of that folder. And then the very first thing I want to do is I want to make a new file. I'm going to call it variable.js. Okay. So let me know when y'all are able to get to making this file called variable.js. If you're on Windows, what was it? Ni?
NI.
Yeah, NI. You want to type out, just want to type out NI?
NI and then whatever you were trying to make. So you say NI variable.json?
Yeah, NI variable.js. Variable.js. So if you're on Windows, this will be. Oh, yeah, if you're on VS Code, then you're pretty much good here. Yeah. But if you're doing it completely by command line, then it'll be different. Were you able to get were you? Yeah.
I don't really care if anything Sandra or anything, so I just want to.
Oh, you just want to open up something? Okay. Um, okay, cool. I'll just you have an installer versions? Let's just get installed quick. Yeah. I was like, maybe we want to take one, try to work with this, but it's mostly more of an IDE.
Yeah. I don't really use that.
Uh, so you should. It may not work, but try. Yeah, gotta open it because it was just
Yeah,
installed. Here you go.
Okay.
You want to just
How much?
cool. And then you want to make a new file.
Oh. Oh. Awesome.
Okay. So the very next thing that we want to do is actually before I even move on, are we all good? Okay. Cool. So we are going to explore variables. So the way that we're going to explore this is just how familiar are y'all with C programming or just C-like programming? A little bit? Okay. Yeah, wait, you took that class?
Yeah, I took that one class. And it was like
Okay.
American.
Are y'all familiar with the idea of scope? Variable scope. Okay, let's go over that real quick. So basically, in terms of variable, there are multiple ways you can access a variable. Is everyone comfortable with what the variable is? Okay, cool. So let's start with just our first variable, right? So let's call our first variable var first. It's equal to first, right? So So this is the first line of JavaScript you'll truly be writing. Var first is equal to first, right? And then the next thing you want to do is you want to type out console.log. So in every programming language, there's like a print line or a print or something. JavaScript's way of doing that is console.log. So console.log first, right? And then back in your terminal, you want to type out node variable.js to run that code. And it should print out first. You want to type out node, which is the program, and then the argument variable.js. Oh, variable. Did you name it variables? It has yeah, variables. Did you save it? You should type Control S. Make it faster. Yes. What does it say? Wait, we can't see this? Oh, it recognized the JavaScript file, but it did not recommend the JS. I forgot to add the extension.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, type it, try it again. There you go. Cool. Arsenal, are you good? Yeah. Radio, are you good? Okay, cool. All right, so let's make a new thing, and we're gonna use curly braces, just in thin air. Just do this, right? So to demonstrate y'all what scoping is, let's make a variable, but this time we want to use the keyword let, right? Let second equals second. And then we want to make another variable called const third is equal to third. So give me a thumbs up whenever y'all are here. Yeah. Thumbs up. Good. Are you good, Ryan? Okay, cool. So I want y'all to type out second here, and then yeah, first let's try out second, and then one of y'all to tell me what happens. And then okay, so type out second, and then run the program using node variable.js, and then I need y'all to tell me what happens. What happened for y'all? What? Yeah, that's exactly what I expect. Cool. So it crashes because basically, imagine these braces have made something called a block. It's a box where those variables can exist at that point in time. So over here, second and third exist, but the moment it's outside of those curly braces, it's not there anymore. Poof, it's gone, right? So how do y'all think we could fix that?
So what's the point of that? Like, what's the point of that?
So basically, yeah. So there's the idea of something called scope, right? Global scope versus local scope. Like this. So the reason why we have stuff like that is so we can properly organize the code. If we had too many variables that we can access, for example, what if we wanted to use the name first again? Or what if there was another thing called first somewhere out there? And then we use it. We no longer know which one it is.
So the inside doesn't see the outside either?
That's a really good question. Why don't you try that? Console.log first over here. And let me see. Tell me what happens. But to be fair, the var variable is very interesting. After you put first here and tell me what happens, we're gonna do another thing. All right. So, what do y'all expect to see if we do console.log first here? Did y'all manage to get it? So what did y'all get in terms of output? Yeah, it sees it, right? So if it's inside, so everything that's outside can be seen inside. But if you try to access from the outside and try to see something inside, you can't see it, right? But what I want y'all to do is move var first inside and console.log first outside. Okay, cool. And then whenever y'all run the code, let me know what y'all see first, right? So what do you notice was the difference between console.log second versus console.log first? So
It's defined inside.
yeah, so for some reason first is defined, but second is undefined, right? So the weird part about the var variable is that if it's defined outside of a function, it will always be global no matter what, which is very problematic in code because you can define multiple firsts anywhere, everywhere, and you no longer know which first they're talking about. So it lends itself to a lot of bugs, and for that reason, developers are like, don't ever use the keyword var. But in a lot of older code examples, before let and const existed, var was the only thing out there. So for old sake, var exists, but do not use it. It's very risky. So did y'all get a chance to try out what const third was? What do y'all expect that to happen for third? And also, what do y'all expect the word const means for a variable?
Static or constant.
Yeah, it doesn't change. Yep, cool. But in JavaScript, there's actually to it. So it doesn't let numbers and strings change. But when you're talking about objects, technically it doesn't let objects change. But when you access the innards of an object in JavaScript, it lets you change that for some reason. Right? So it's sort of not letting things change. Cool. So just to reiterate, let and const follow scoping rules. So when you add like braces around it, you basically hide it from other places, right? Typically you want to use either let or const for most things. You'll rarely see var. And that should basically cover the basics of variables, right? So let's go over data types, right? How many of y'all are familiar with data types? Yeah, you work to see, of course you'll be familiar with UI. Okay, so I'm assuming a little bit of y'all are familiar with data types. So basically in programming languages, every piece of data is usually categorized in different ways. So some types of data are integers, some of them are strings or a sequence of letters, some of them are just a single letter or a character, some of them is a logical truth or false value called a Boolean, right? So those are data types. It kind of tells you what is the data I'm looking at. Every programming language in some way works with data types just based off how the numbers work, but in terms of how that's represented is something up for debate in any programming language. So the thing about JavaScript is that it's something called a dynamically typed programming language. You all know what that could mean. So in C, you have to specify the data type. Int variable is equal to 5. You can't do int variable is equal to a word, right? You have to make sure that's an integer. You can't do double or a decimal variable is equal to a word or just to a word. It has to be some sort of number, right? But in JavaScript, it's dynamically typed, which means that it doesn't care, right? So you type out node. Let's try this out, right? So let's work with the new variable types that we've learned. So let's do let num5 is equal to 5, right? So in the previous session, someone asked me why this is undefined. Because whenever we declare things in JavaScript, it doesn't return anything. We just declare something, right? Only whenever a value returns something, it does something weird. So let's try that out, right? So if you type out num5 again, you'll see the number 5, right? But I want y'all to assign a word or string to num5 and see what happens. So just a reminder, a word or a string is something, a sequence of letters enclosed by double quotes or single quotes, right? In JavaScript at least. So so yeah, try assigning like the string version of number 5. I like drinking my tea. So what did y'all see? It worked, right? Yeah, it just let you assign the string. So it let you just do this. Num5 is equal to 5. Num5 is equal to, right? It just let you do whatever you want. And you'll notice that if you come from C, you're like, what? What did you just do? How could you? How could you? like, why is this even allowed? And a lot of people actually hate this feature because sometimes when you look at the num5 and the string 5, letters are different than numbers, right? And then whenever you're actually using it in code, people are like, how do you know if that's actually a letter or not? But then it returns a number, and you're like, but I swore that was actually, but it's not. And then now you're like, kind of like, what's going on here? Like, did I read something wrong? Did you like look everywhere, and it turns out you missed a single letter, and you understood something differently. It's one of the like you just wasted your time. It's just really frustrating. So people kind of hate it, but others kind of love it. They're like, man, I don't have to think about types, right? So it's kind of a balancing act, but in a more sophisticated code base, people like knowing what the types are. But because that types in JavaScript are this flexible, I'm going to show y'all what it's like to compare two values together, right? So let's do num5 is equal to 5. And then let's make a new variable called string5 is equal to 5, right? So num5 is number 5, string5 is 5, right? So you see, you're like, yeah, that's clearly 5, right? So if you come from a programming language like C, you're gonna lose your mind. So like, I want y'all to type out num5 equals to string5 and tell me what happens. Yeah, it's true, right? That it is equal. If you come from C, that's insane. It's just like, those things aren't equal because like numbers operate differently from letters. But here you are telling me that they're the same thing. That's just like, what are you telling me right now, right? So yeah, if you do num5 is equal to string5, it's true, right? And here's the crazy part. Why is that a thing? Why is the double equals like that? It's because it compares the content of 5 and 5. They convert into something that's compatible with each other. But a lot of times, it's kind of unnecessary. Like, why did you do that? I didn't ask you to do that, right? So that's why JavaScript developers are like, never, ever use the double equals. So you use this instead. You use num5 is triple equals to string5, which considers the fact that one is a number and one is a letter, right? Or just a word. So you get false. Very big difference. So when you're writing your if statements and conditionals, whatever, use the triple equals. Okay. Now I'm going to show you one thing that will hopefully spark your curiosity in the world of JavaScript types. So you probably are familiar with the undefined variable, right? But look at this. I can not undefined and it's true, and not undefined and it's false. So I can do like undefined and undefined, and that's true, right? And this here is one of the greatest contradictions ever. You can do not an array, and not an empty array, and it's false, or an empty array itself is just an empty array, or not an empty array, and that's true. Right. So that's just how fluid types are in JavaScript. They like to be ambiguous like this. And it's very dangerous, as you can tell, because now you don't know. Sometimes, a lot of times you don't know, right? So if you want to explore further in that realm, just be aware that exists, but that gives you all a basic idea of data types in JavaScript. So did all of that kind of flow together, make sense? Right, good. Cool, so y'all get the basics. So now let's talk about objects. objects in JavaScript are very confusing because multiple things. When you say, I use an object in JavaScript, someone's gonna look at you and you're like, which one? Because there is an object class, there is like an object that you made out of a class, there is the main God object, the one object, there is JSON, or just things that are in JavaScript. You could even be mentioning a function. No one knows exactly like what is supposed to be the modified object. But when people talk about objects in JSON, they're usually referring to something called JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is what this thing is. So it's basically a way of storing data. So on the left side, so before the colon, there's something called a property, and after the colon, it's usually something called a value, right? So the thing about JSON is that it's really, really good at representing data. So let's practice how to use JSON right now. You'll be using JSON so much in your like web development career, it's not even funny. Like it is pretty much standard in a lot of stuff. So let's play with that right now. So go back to VS Code. Make a new file called object.js. And then inside of object.js, I want y'all to put a const shows. And then I want y'all to make an array, right? So do y'all know what arrays are in programming languages? A little bit. So arrays contain multiple values in it. So for example, if you want to contain like a list of multiple shows, you would type it out like Spy X Family, Cobra Kai. What else is really popular right now? Stranger Things. So this array contains 3 values that are stringed into one variable. So that's what an array is. But yeah, we'll be working off an array just for the object example. So inside of this array, you want to make an object with a curly brace, and then I want you to put the title of your show, and then a description or quote, right? So for me, I was recently watching Spy X Family, and a quote that I saw or I heard was a spy or an assassin. That's spy. I'm so excited. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to print that value out, right? So console.log shows. So what do y'all expect whenever we console.log this out? Are we all good, by the way? Just making sure we're still following. You good, Mark? Okay. You good, Brady? Okay. Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. There should be a comma after that. Well, to be fair, in some JSON formats, they don't like the comma for the very last item, but for the very last property, but kind of up for debate, I guess. It should work either way. Preston, are you good? Are you back? Oh, you're still inside of Node. So to exit Node, and you press Control-C. Control-C twice, right? And then basically navigate back to Node. Brian. Okay, cool. so basically you gotta remember how you got your folders, right? So you have to, so it's in this folder called, so you from here you see it's compressed print, and you go to your documents. So first you have to go to your documents.
There's so many versions. I know.
Oh yeah, we're on to it.
I always see the gifts on r/. I never watch the actual show.
Tab, tab,
Right there.
bottom.
Can you rip in the chat?
So object.js
I'm gonna rip on my cat.
the shell doesn't
You
go
can
with
rip it in
that, right? It's just
Oh, yeah.
so Node,
That was
the program knows what that is, right? So what you have to do, yeah, Node will run object.js, and then you should be able to see something. Cool. Great. Pragma, you managed to get there?
Yes.
Cool. Great. So y'all should be able to see the contents of the object. So how do we access the inside of an object, right? What if we just wanted a title? So in the array, to access the very first element, you have to use 0. 0 represents the first element. And then so on for each element that follows after that. But for this case, we want to just access the very first element, and we want to access the title. And if we do that, it should print out just the title. So let's do this. Right? And then if we do the description, it should be the same thing. But let's add one more interesting part to this. Let's add world, right? And in this world property, we're actually going to add another object. And then inside this object, we're going to add another property called type. And I'm going to put European here, right? So, did y'all notice what I just did? Inside of this object, I put another object inside of that as a property. So what this basically means in programming terms is that it's recursive. That it can be reused inside of each other over and over till the very end, right? And this is really good whenever you have multiple layers of like data that has to be dug deep down. That's why developers really love it, because if you want to see how to access the most innermost parts of an object, do show 0 dot world dot type, right? And then when you go to the terminal, you should see European. So that lets you dig into your data, if that makes sense. So let me know when y'all are able to get to something like this. Any other questions?
No. I was trying to think about
So real world example would be,
like passwords or some shit.
real world example is there's a movie database up there that has like all the Star Wars movies. Each Star Wars movie is in an array and it has an ID, title, actor, studio, characters, and then inside those characters there's multiple data points. So you're basically using it as a database. Mainly JSON is just like a lot of data that you work with. It's just keys and values, things to work with in terms of pure data. It's not all variables. The best part about all this is that it's under one variable.
Are all the things like title, description, world, are these like pre-made things or are these things you're making?
You're making it up. Yeah, you get to. I guess you want to use database lingo. You're making up this schema, however you like your data to be formatted, right? And in fact, if you want to use like a real world database, oftentimes you have to use a JSON object just like this to specify exactly how your data is looking like or shaped to access the stuff inside of a real NoSQL database. But that's completely outside of this conversation. What's up, Park? So the red underscore shows that, oh, you're missing a comma. Yeah, I keep on forgetting this, but after every line, except for the final one, you need to make sure it has a comma. One of the most common JavaScript JSON object errors is that. Okay, cool. So everything, so are y'all comfortable with objects now? Yeah. Once y'all play more with it, it'll feel better. Highly recommend just like making them on the fly and just seeing what you can and can't do. But yeah, that's JSON objects. So for this part, 7:30. Let me think. we may actually be able to get more deeper into functions, since we're going to enter this a little bit faster. So this is gonna sound strange. So functions. So JavaScript is something called a first-class programming language, which I don't know why they call it first class, but essentially what first class means is that functions are just like variables. They're just like numbers and strings and values. You just assign them to variables and throw them around. You'll know that in programming languages like C and Java's just C and Java. What? Like, you can do that? But recently, more, in their newer versions, they have similar versions called lambdas. But besides the point, originally in C, you can't just assign a function to a variable unless you use a function pointer. So let's show y'all what that looks like. So there are multiple different kinds of functions. There's multiple ways of doing it. So you can do something like this, just call a function, which is a keyword. There's setting a variable to a function. And then there's this, which is called the arrow notation. This is very recent. For your understanding, consider that these two are the same thing. But a good challenge, just to be on the side, especially if you just want to research this, push yourself. This is really useful to know. Just what's the difference between this one and this one, right? So if you want to share that on Discord, just for everybody, that'd be awesome. Highly recommend that challenge. And then the last thing we'll be talking about are callbacks. All right. So let's play around with that. Let's see my battery. Okay, be good. So let's make a new file called functions.js, right? So inside this, let's make a function. And in typical programming languages, you're probably used to like setting return types and whatnot. But in JavaScript, we don't care. Just function and just name of a function. So I'm going to call this function called first, right? And what this function will do is it will console.log first, right? And then what I want us to do is I want us to call first, right? So are y'all familiar with the word invoke? Invocations and invoke. Okay, so a lot of people online will say stuff like call the function, invoke the function. So you define a function right here. So y'all know what a function even is in like a more general sense? Yeah, it's like a repeatable set of instructions. But in the functional world, you have to really think about it as an input and output. So your mind is resting for your sanity, really. So functions will take inputs and outputs, right? But in this case, it does output something on the side, just console.log first, right? So whenever you run this file, you get that, right? So let's make another function. Let's call it function second. And this time we return second. Wrong. Okay. And then when I call second, what do y'all expect to happen? Yeah, my bad. Second. Hopefully this is making a little bit, I'm going somewhere with this. I know that I think return types was definitely something very confusing to me as a beginner. I'm not gonna lie. Like, what does it mean whenever a function returns something? So when you think about functions, and especially in the context of JavaScript and functional programming, again, it's better to think of it as an input-output, and even closer to math. So whenever you think of a function in math, you use that function, you put in a number, and it returns another number, right? There's an input, and then there's an output. There's an input, there's an output. So when you do the return second part, that's the output, right? So when you call second, what you should expect is that nothing should happen, right? And the thing is that second returns something. It actually returns second. So there's a value that's returned here. Nothing's just being done with it. So you do console.log second. What you'll find is that it will print out second. And the reason why is because second, whenever you call it, so you don't pass anything in, but the output is second, right? It's very important to think about things like this, because this is not just for regular values. One of the biggest things in JavaScript that I'm about to show you that will perhaps blow your mind is this. Function third, return function, return a function, console.log third. So this is what it means to be a first-class programming language. So this function returns another function whenever you call it. And in functional programming, that is almost a closure. But you don't have to worry about that. We'll get into more of that stuff later. So when you call third, like this, what do you expect to happen whenever you call third? Anyone want to take a guess? What? It will definitely not print anything, but it will do something. What will it do?
Scream at you?
It just returns that function, right? So a function returns another function, right? So again, like Ryan said, when you actually use it, nothing happens. But when you do this, console log third, and then you do this, all right? So this looks kind of weird, right? Third happens. So what just happened? So when I call third, it returns this function. And this function goes back here, right? And then I call that function, which is actually this function. That's third. Did that make sense? So that is very powerful in JavaScript. Very, very powerful. But I've still yet to even grasp how powerful that even is. Anyways, let's do another example of something weird with functions, right? And this time, I'm gonna do something different. Const fourth is equal to function, and then let's add a function called callback right here, right? And I want to call this callback. So what do y'all think is going on here? So this is the most like put together, everything together kind of deal, right? So any guesses? So what's going on here is that this variable contains a function, but these two are not the same. They're considered different ideas in JavaScript. One is a function object, but the other is a functional expression. Very weird differences, right? So anyways, for y'all's sake, same thing, right? So fourth is a function. This function takes another function called callback, right? So callback functions are just functions that are passed as arguments that will be called later inside of that function, right? So again, this is a function. And here's the thing about JavaScript. This is the most scary part about JavaScript. Remember how that dynamically typed stuff? We don't know what this could be when we actually call it. We're assuming that it is a function. We're totally assuming. But one day in the future, you may look at that code and you'll be like, that's not a function. It's just, that's a string or something, right? And then you do that, the whole program crashes and you spend 5 hours and be like, oh, it was actually a function this entire time, jeez, right? So yeah, watch out for this. It's good to label, so this is a good documentation point. But anyways, to reiterate, you pass a function inside of a function, and this inner function will be called, right? So let me show y'all what that looks like. Right now, y'all like, what is this going to do? Like, it's just calling a function. You don't even know what this is. You didn't even define what this is, right? So let's do that right now. So when you do fourth, right, you could just do it like this and nothing happens, right? But it's likely that it will freak out, that it was expecting something, right? So what you want to do is you need to pass a callback in. And this time I'm gonna do another different thing just to show just the weirdness of functions. So we're gonna pass in a function without a name. And you know what? You know, if you don't have a name, then you're anonymous. So you're an anonymous function, right? But in most cases, whenever you do something like this, people just call it a callback, right? And this is an equal. This is a right angle bracket, and then this is called an arrow function. But they're technically not the same as the others, but they're used similarly, right? So I'm just exposing y'all to the weirdness of it all. All right. So inside of fourth, we do console.log fourth, right? And then what do y'all think will happen after this? So you call that functions, and then you will see fourth. So let's go over what just happened. So inside of fourth, the first argument of fourth is looking for a function, and inside of fourth, we will call that function as callback, right? And we basically define what that function would look like in the argument right here, console.log, right? So that's a little bit of function inception, and it will definitely take a lot of time to play with, but you will get used to it as you run into a lot of problems. So hopefully that intro makes a little bit of sense to y'all. Did it illuminate your world? Actually, do y'all have any questions about what this all is? I showed y'all like some basics. What?
We're just being productive.
Okay. We good? We good to move on? All right, cool. Alrighty. Back to the keynote. So let's talk about modules. So modules are one of the most debated things ever because they exist in multiple different forms. So there's one in Node.js, there's something called Common.js, there's something called AMD, required, ES modules, and then they all uses something called Browserify. Some of it exists in browser, some of it exists in Node, some of it exists here, some of it exists there. It's basically this weird like bleh of everything. So in terms of our use case, you don't have to worry about required, but if you're ever working with Node.js, you will run into this thing, and it will look very weird, and I highly suggest y'all to like get experience with it. Definitely reach out to me because I definitely recently discovered all of these things, so I feel like I have some knowledge on the subject, but not definitive yet. But I will show y'all how to do some basic module work. So what even are modules? Like, why do we even use them? So like, how do we use multiple files of JavaScript to work with each other? That's what modules are there for. So we're gonna use modules right now. And to use modules, what we wanna do is we wanna actually change our file extension name to MJS, which seems counterproductive, I know, but that's this is just one way of doing it. It's just the easiest way without basically destroying y'all's brains. So yeah, we're just gonna keep it this simple. So rename everything to MJS. So let me know, give me a thumbs up whenever y'all are good here. Cool. Good, Ryan. Good, Farma. Good. Preston. Okay, cool. So to properly, so there's two things about modules. So let's see. Let me think about this. So let's focus on object.mjs. I think it's a really good example to use. So to make a value available in JavaScript to export, you want to, or in terms of a module. So first I'll just show y'all the keyword. So export const. What does this do, right? So export says that I'm making this variable available to use in another file, right? And this file is in something called object.mjs. The name of this exported object is shows, right? So you want to keep that in mind, because say we want to make a new file called modules.mjs, right? To use that file, we have to import curly brace inside of the object. What did I call it? Shows, right? shows, and then which file did we use it from? From, and then dot slash object.mjs. Okay, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So just to go over again. So from object.mjs, we want to import a thing from it. So object.mjs, and we kind of told exactly what thing we're exporting here by saying export const shows, right? And then we're referencing it here. So we have access to that object in another file. So does that make a little bit of sense? So, yeah, what's up, Brady?
Does export just allow it to be usable in any file, or is
Yeah.
it more like is there a thing to specify?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it does. Like, it will just make it available in any file you want. So I want y'all to do just console.log shows 0 dot anything dot title, and then whenever you go to node modules.mjs, it should return what happens. But notice that something interesting just happened. Node modules.mjs, right? For some reason, this happened, right? It printed out this first, right? So the way modules work in JavaScript is that it will execute the code inside of this file while exporting it. The interesting thing about this is that you want to get specific is that each module is a singleton inside of JavaScript, and I would leave that for y'all to kind of explore what that exactly means. But just know that that's why people usually don't leave money in like object.mjs and then module in an exportable file, right? To keep things clean, basically. But sometimes people would like to initialize a really big object ahead of time and reference it over and over again in different files. And there are use cases for it. There's actually one major use case for that in React. But I'll leave for y'all to explore what that is, right? The reason why I'm saying that is because I actually recently discovered a use case for that. It's really interesting. All right, cool. So if you run module.mjs and then show 0.title, you will get this, right? And if you remove the in object.mjs this console.log, which makes it a clean export file or module file, then you just get SpyX family, right? So hopefully, did that was all that sensible and clear? Okay, cool. And now the last part of the JavaScript training bash. Functional programming. This is actually something that you will cover more specifically in programming languages, but I just felt like it was really important to mention now because in React and React Native is heavily inspired off of these ideas. Yeah, very like it's almost in your face in terms of how much they reference the ideas behind functional programming. Multiple libraries in React, the whole idea and just everything about it is based off of functional programming. So if you want to explore more about this, on the side, highly recommend looking at these topics and sharing. But we're going to look at an example of one functional programming method. So I'm assuming that some of y'all have worked with for loops before, but I guess in this case, I'm going to assume that we're not familiar at all. So let's go back to our code one last time. And instead of modules.mjs, actually, instead of object.mjs, I want us to add another another show to our shows list, right? So for me, I'm gonna put in Guren login, and then for description, I'm gonna put the power, and then for world, I'm gonna put type post-apocalyptic. All right, so I'm gonna wait till everybody adds their second show to the list. be able to. I think I
Based
should
off the
recommend.
troubleshooting.
Yeah, the troubleshooting kind of cleared up for this.
I think in the future you just have to run a test run.
I don't think I would have been able to predict those errors. This execution policy one was very specific.
Oh no, a lot of them had the same thing.
Yeah, it's been like multiple years since I've had that because.
Ah.
Yeah, right.
You have it on.
Yeah, I just had that on a long time ago. Okay, so did everyone add their second show? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. Give you some more time. Okay, show. Okay, are you good, Pragna? All right, cool. So let's go back to module.mjs. Very next thing that we want to do is a really interesting thing. So typically to print out every show inside of this object array of shows, you have to do for let I is equal to 0. I has to be less than shows dot length, I plus plus. And then you would have to do console.log shows I, right? And what should happen is you should get a list of all the shows. But like, isn't it annoying every single time you have to do this? Like you have to like let I equal 0, have to specify all these things. Functional programmers kind of hate that. It's kind of it feels really iffy to us, actually. So the functional way of doing this is this. So we don't do this. We do shows.forEach, right? So this is not the same as a for each loop, right? This is a for each function. So inside of for each function, you'll take the current element and you will console.log the element. So in this case, it's a lot faster. The only thing that you're doing is that you're saying, I want a for loop, and I want to print out every element with a function, right? So let me explain to y'all what's going on here. So there are multiple types of these types of functions, right? For this case, this is the for each one. But what it's doing is that for every element inside of the shows, it's applying this type of function to that. In this case, it kind of tells you what that function should be. So it's different for each type of these functions, but in this case, this value is assumed to be each element inside of that shows, right? So when you go back and then you print it out, it's the same exact thing, right? Just a lot cleaner and more robust, really. It's the same thing, you're just working with less variables, and you're just using a function applied to each value inside of that array. So does that make sense to y'all? Yeah, it's a little bit weird because it's for each. But I guess I can show y'all another function. So we want to do console.log. So you can't do this with a for loop. This one you can't do with a for loop. So console.log shows.map element, and you want to return let's see, how should I do this? Let's return element. How else should I do this? I know, return label element like this, right? And hopefully I remember what actually happens. Okay, cool. A little bit weird, but all right, let me explain to y'all what's going on. So this map, what this basically does is it's almost the same idea as the for each loop. So for each applies a function to each value inside of that array. But map does the same thing, except map takes that current element and basically changes it, right? So in this case, I made it into a new array, and I added a label to that, right? And through that, map returns a new bigger entire array for the whole thing, right? Which doesn't make sense, but I'll show you all a visual, or just like what it actually returns, right? So if you remember originally, it was just this as an array form, but now it's an array of arrays, right? So I took all the values inside of that array and basically changed it to something new. I added a label to it. So using map, I was able to change everything inside that array, add something, a little bit of something inside each, right? So it's a little bit new, but that's the idea of functional programming, in that you're basically using functions to control everything, really. So yeah, that's one example of that. The map function is used a lot in React. All right, cool. Hopefully, did that make sense? At least give y'all an idea of functional programming, at least just how to use a little bit of those functions.
Can you go back to the code?
To the what?
To the code.
Okay. Which part? This one?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out
No, is that yours?
That's mine.
Oh, this one's-
Yeah,
Oh, do you use yours?
Yeah.
go ahead and use it. Okay. Are you good, Brady? Any questions?
I can't figure out why I
You put your arrow outside of the parentheses, so
Oh, I didn't even see
yeah, so you're gonna do this, and then that's it. Yeah. It's I got that's actually one problem with arrow functions, that you do get confused with the parentheses. Okay, cool. Any more questions about this? All right, let's move on. Cool, we doing great, y'all. Because now we're on to talking about React, right? So, how many of y'all are familiar with React? That's great. Usually folks are a little bit familiar, so having no familiarity makes it more interesting for me, right? So basically, just to give y'all an overview, React is a web development framework. It's used to make web apps. So web development framework means that there's a conversation between what's the difference between a library and framework, but I'll just call it as a tool, quote unquote, that helps you make web apps. And of course you can do that without React. It's just there are things in it that make it a lot easier, and you'll get to experience those things in a bit, right? So I'll go over just some of the things you'll be learning. So the first thing you'll be learning is the DOM, Document Object Model, how all UIs are actually working. And then I'll go over some specifics. For what?
Oh, you just forgot to bring a charger as well.
Oh yeah, I did too. That's not my charger.
Oh,
That's the library's.
that's the library.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like low-key open for temporary use.
Yeah, it is.
I wouldn't say that. You'd check out the laptop. You'd
Oh.
charge it with the laptop. So,
Yeah, but in here, kind of, just whatever. All right, so we'll go over individual components inside of React, and I'll kind of go over exactly what that is in a bit. Styling, I'm actually gonna skip that one because we got a lot to go over. So I'll leave y'all to explore how to style your components and make it look all pretty on your time. And then we'll go over properties of components, which is just another technical term, and states, another thing that's attached to components, and hooks, yet another thing that be attached to other components. Those are all terms, and they're all related components, and you will learn what that is. So React is a system, an idea, a framework, a way of doing things. It's an opinionated way of doing things. You all know what opinionated versus unopinionated means in the context of software engineering? Okay. So there are folks out there, two camps basically. One camp believes that code should follow a certain way. That is opinionated. You should do these things because we think that it will make your architecture better. It will make your code cleaner. It will lend yourself to less problems with these trade-offs, virtue trade-offs. Unopinionated is like, we're gonna make it to where you get to decide what you want this code to mean for yourself, right? React is very opinionated. It has a set way, a philosophy and belief in terms of how you should do things, but it's not gonna stop you from doing things however you like, right? But there is a way. Okay, so the first thing we'll be talking about is the DOM components, right? So, how many of y'all have coded in HTML before and worked with the DOM? Okay, yeah, which is great. This is honestly one of the most important things to kind of be aware of, actually. Every UI framework uses a tree structure, right? Do you all know what a tree structure is? So trees look like this. So think of UIs as a bunch of boxes and rectangles. So you have a header, that's a box. You have a paragraph, that's a box. You have a picture, that's a box. And inside those pictures, there's a bigger box that contains all of that. And there's a box that contains even more of that. There's a box that contains the entire website. There's a box that's a button. There's a box that's everything. There's just containers within containers. So am I painting an image for y'all? Are y'all seeing something? Okay, good. So basically that's what a DOM is. It's just UI boxes within boxes. And a tree structure represents that box in code. So basically imagine this as the biggest box, and then this as another box, and this as another box, and multiple things inside multiple boxes. It's just branching out, right? And it's just represented as a tree, just multiple ways of representing the same thing. It's just how you look at it, right? So yeah, UI is a tree structure. And it's really important to kind of understand the idea that every UI has its own tree structure. Like Android has its own, iOS has its own, Windows has its own, Mac has its own. Like every library has its own version of the box or the DOM, right? And the thing about React Native is that it takes native components and turns it into its own virtual DOM. And that is a very loaded sentence. So let's break that one down. So do y'all know what native means in the context of code software? Okay, so basically there are things that are built for that platform. So when you use a Mac app or an iOS app, you're like, hey, this looks like an app that's only for iPhone. And then you use a Windows app. It's like an app that only looks the way it does for Windows. And then you use a Linux app that looks the way it does for Linux, and Android for Android, right? So all these different apps look like they're built for different platforms. They look specifically for those platforms, right? And they're performed specifically, like they're the fastest on that platform. They can't run anywhere else. That's what it means to be native. It means that it is built for that specific platform. So does that make sense? Right. So basically, even for web, it's considered like a native place. Like each HTML element is a native element built for that page. So there's multiple layers to nativeness, but basically React takes all of that native whatever UI, right? In this case, web, so HTML, and converts it to virtual DOM. So it makes its own tree. So it takes whatever's old and like native and original HTML and converts it into its own version called the virtual DOM. And you may wonder, why would they do something like that? It's because they're just unhappy with the original DOM. They're like, I don't know why it's got so many things. I feel like we could do things a lot better here, right? So they took all of that, made it their own virtualized tree, right? And they basically spit that back out as native components. So do you all understand what render means in concept of computer science? Okay, yeah, a little bit. You probably heard like in terms of like graphics rendering engines or just rendering things in general. But when you render something, you're taking data or like this abstract idea of something and turning it into reality, right? So in this case, this is a representation of a website, right? It's just letters. Let's be real, it's just letters and blah, 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 right? But rendering takes all of the structuring of all of this and spits out a website, right? So that's what render means. It's really, I feel like it's an important word to understand because people use that all the time in React. I'm gonna render this component. Like, did you check renders? Did you re-render, blah, blah, blah? Like, it's like, okay, what is actually going on here? So what's actually going on here is, again, you have your native HTML components, right? So this is stuff that's like this stuff that's already on the web page, right? And it converts it into virtual DOMs. Now it's this abstract React way of doing things. And then it's got to render those components, which means that it has to spit all of that back out into regular HTML because that's the language of the web, right? So a good way to imagine virtual DOM is that it's a really good translation layer. I mean, it's not really, but you can think of it that way, right? So it takes native, does its own React wizardry, it spits back out native code to make that website, right? Did that make sense? So am I painting a picture in your head? Okay, good. It's a very important concept to understand. That virtual DOM is actually an interview question. So yeah, so it takes the native, renders it out, right? It takes data, renders it out. Components are rendered through React, right? So to put all of this DOM stuff together, imagine all of this as Lego blocks that you're building together. You're just making your own custom Lego blocks, and you're just composing UIs off these Lego blocks. You're making really small Lego blocks. Like, you just compose multiple big structures of these Lego characters and blocks together to make this whole world. Just imagine it as that. That's what composable means, but I would highly recommend y'all to explore what composition means in the context of software engineering. It's a very big deal in React. But yeah, cool. Let's go on to props and state. So let's say you want to make a Lego and you're like, my Lego's red, your Lego's green, and my Lego's yellow. That property is yellow, right? So let's say you make a Lego component, right? And you gotta like give it some data to kind of tell what that component is supposed to be. Give it some representation, give it some meaning, right? That color is a property or a prop for that component. Did that make sense? Yeah. So color is a property of a component, right? And what other properties could a Lego have? It could have spikes, so it could have decorations, right? It could have textures or whatever, right? So these are different properties that can be applied on that component, right? And you're gonna see why that's significant in a bit. Whenever, let's say we make our own Lego component in a bit, right? So the thing about props is that it also has a way of enabling data to flow throughout React. So if you look at this diagram, this parent component has props that's passed through here, and this component can pass out props to multiple props that it makes down the line, which can look kind of confusing. But honestly, this is a more advanced diagram. For our cases, we're going to make a simple component, but just imagine as props as literal properties that a component just generally has, right? The next thing we need to talk about is state. So state is data that a prop has, or not, data that a component just has that changes, underline changes over time, right? Changes over time. This is just data that keeps track. Like, what is state for us? Like, what am I speaking right now? That's my state. How am I feeling? That's my current state, right? It's just stuff that, it's similar to properties, but they're properties that change over time that's specific to me, right? And it will make so much more sense once we get into implementing these in React. But yeah, okay. So does at least prop and state, is there a picture that's being painted in your mind right now? Any questions about it? It will make a lot more sense once we get code in. but yeah, I was gonna say usually in my React workshops I kind of keep it surface level, but I'm actually digging a lot deeper into some of the concepts a lot more. So another big part of React, this is arguably the last complicated part, is hooks. So I really don't know how to exactly define hooks besides the fact that they are things that add certain properties to components. So if you want to add state to your component, you have to use the useState hook. And I was going to say there are 3 different types of hooks usually. So one is useState, which adds state to a component. There's useEffect, which adds a side effect to your component, and typically you don't have to worry about useEffect. I'll come back to useEffect in a bit. And custom is a combination of useEffect and useState together, represented as a single hook. And that is a very advanced thing, and y'all will probably make some of these down the line, making this project or not. It may or may not be a thing, but we're mostly going to be using useState, right? So what is useEffect? And what even is a side effect? So in functional programming, so you know how like a Lego, it just has its color, it has its texture and shape, and it probably like knows certain things about stuff like how damaged is it. That's probably a state value, right? But what if a human takes it and throws it across the room? How is that represented, right? So basically the idea of a side effect is that in a component, anything external that affects that component is a side effect. And whenever you want to work with side effects, you want to use effect, right? It's likely that I'll probably not talk about this a lot right now because it requires you to understand quite a bit of JavaScript to kind of grasp. There are things about useEffect that they abstract. Like for example, I never talked to you all about a component lifecycle. And composition, different conversation. Y'all don't need to worry about it, but this actually makes React easier to use, a lot easier to use. It makes React way easier to use now than ever, right? You used to have to know a lot more JavaScript, but now you know less. You still have to know some, but you know less. Okay, cool. So let's dig into React Native. So why React Native? What even is React Native? So you remember our conversation about native code? React is only for the web. How can we make apps specifically for iOS or Android? That's where React Native comes in. React Native is a cross-platform framework that's built on top of React to make mobile apps, right? So it has the same stuff. It has components, and there's ways to style it differently. But we'll go over. Yeah, I don't think we'll get to styles today. Actually, maybe for React Native we can talk about styles because it does work a little bit differently, and it's really interesting how they put styles into React Native. Okay, so let's just talk about React Native. So again, the difference between React and React Native is that React is for web apps. They're for websites. They're literally www.yourapp.com, right? That's React. React Native is on your phone. You open that app and then you use it, right? So that's React Native, and I kind of gave y'all a way to challenge what it even is native, but now y'all know. So why do we want to do cross-platform app development in one framework? It's because it's Unity. So like one place to code. The problem with why don't we just make an Android app and iOS app is that we have to be experts in both. We have to know both ecosystems, and that's a lot of overhead. If you already know HTML, you already know web development, you already know JavaScript, which is something a lot of people know, why not just do it all in one place and just get it done there, right? So that's the mindset behind cross-platform app development with Unity. And the thing is that if for React, the native components are HTML, then for React Native, the native components are views. Because in Android, native Android and native iOS, everything that makes up an app in those are composed of something called views, right? Which is really interesting. They're just called views, but essentially they're just a bunch of rectangles. It could be a button, it could be a big list, it could be a status bar, and it could be like, all of this, they're just a bunch of rectangles. Just erase all the pictures. They're just rectangles. The world, everything we know is just rectangles, right? So yeah, now let's dig in. Now it's your turn. Right? Okay, and software tests, we're not gonna go over that. So let's do it. Let's make a React app, right? So two things I would like y'all to do. First, I want y'all to install this app called Expo Go on your phone. So you'll see why we need this app in a bit. Actually, I forgot the UTA Wi-Fi thing. Next time we're gonna bring a router to our.
I think you can
work.
start a hotspot.
Yeah, but I don't want to use up my data like that. We'll just bring up.
You can use your laptops as a beacon.
Oh really? Interesting. Expo Go. So I'll just show y'all what it is. So y'all should definitely try this out once y'all get home. But we'll do a different version of this. Technically, React Native builds for web too, but we don't want to do that because that's why React exists, like a regular React framework. React Native, you want to focus on using that for mobile development because that's what it's known for and what it's most supported for. All the other stuff is relatively new. So Expo Go looks like this. Let me show you. Okay. If you want to see what that looks like, looks like this. Yeah. It's under the pizza at. Ryan, you want to see it? Yeah. Okay. And then here's what Expo Go. Yeah, you got it already. Cool. Unfortunately, because UTA is very strict on its network policy, we can't test our app here, but definitely try this out whenever you get home. But we'll test it in different ways, right? So let's go back to our terminal, and I want y'all to type this out: npm install -g expo CLI, right? And I want y'all to press enter, and then we'll see what happens. Man, this is pretty smooth so far. It's been pretty smooth so far.
Was it
We
on
ironed it
supposed
all out.
All of y'all's environments have been very stable. I'm very happy about that. Yeah, you're supposed to just show like a download.
Was it that rough the first time?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
A lot of problems.
A lot. Stopping.
Are you good, Chris?
Their first two
Yeah.
stuff.
Everything is working the way it's supposed to be.
It was part of the session getting started with troubleshooting.
Yeah. Well, there were definitely a lot of interesting problems, like things that I didn't realize. Because some of them they had like Node installed a long time ago,
Oh yeah.
and they had different commands. They were using different commands for their environment. So everybody basically had a different setup that I kind of had to figure out. But now I know them. I've been reminded of all of them all at once. I was hoping to actually skirt around that problem by using NVM, but that did not fix the problem at all. Oh my goodness, one problem for another. It's funny. Okay, let me know. Give me a thumbs up whenever it's like, yeah, it's clean. It's already installed. Garna, is it good for you? Yeah, that's good. Is it good for you, Preston? Yes. Usually whenever you install packages, it has a lot. As long as it doesn't crash on you, it's like multiple red errors everywhere, then it's like you're good. So I already have it installed, so I should be good. Apparently I don't have it already installed. Damn, I probably should have done this. Oh.
How do you not have it installed?
I don't. Maybe it's just reinstalling it. I don't know. I would expect it to just quickly go through it, but it doesn't hurt to do it again. Yeah, whatever. Anyways, you want to type out expo init and give it a name. So for me, I'm just making it my name, right? So type this out, and you'll see something that's like this. So let me know whenever you're at this state. We're good? All right, and then you want to press enter for blank. So another thing. So you probably noticed this thing called Yarn. Yarn and NPM work off the same system. Yarn is built on top of NPM. React apps really love Yarn because they believe that it's better than NPM. But of course, developers have their opinions. So, we use whichever platform prefers what. Again, React is kind of opinionated. Right? So we want to do Yarn. No, let's not do that. Let's go back to VS Code. So you want to type out code. You want to CD into it. So CD into whatever you named your project. So Longwind for me. And then I'm going to type out code dot. And now you see, boom, this is our app. All in code, right? And since we have time, I can actually go over some more project structure with y'all. So, what is Node Modules? Node Modules is a really big folder with all the dependencies your project needs under one folder. You never, ever usually want to go inside of Node Modules and mess with that stuff. Never, ever, ever. Never. Don't go into Node Modules. No, just don't do it. Right? Like, just ignore it. Pretend it doesn't even exist. Like, that's how far you just don't want to think about Node Modules, right? App.json is specific to Expo. It tells, it gives some data to like iOS and Android, just like what's the icon, what's the title of the app, it's just other metadata. It's JSON, so it's using the notation you just learned. Babel.config.js, don't need to know about that right now. Package.json, this one's actually pretty important. So are y'all familiar with the makefile in C? A little bit, maybe? So package.json represents in one file how you can build all the dependencies of your project. So it tells you how to start it tells you how to start the development environment and other stuff relating to that. It tells you all of the dependencies that it's using, right? It tells you all of the developmental dependencies, which you'll worry about that some other time, right? But yeah, package.json is a representation of all of that. If you're wondering for what is the JavaScript version of a makefile, this is it. Oh shoot, it's almost 8:30. Shit. Oh wait, no, it's out of time. I'm so sorry. How do y'all want to do this? Do y'all want me to keep on continuing and building the app, or do y'all need to leave? For some reason I thought we were done. We were ready till 9. Oh, my bad, y'all. How do y'all want to do it? Y'all can watch the recording in the other session if y'all want, or I can just go.
How to build it.
What?
Right now.
Yeah, I can technically just.
Have the code is on. We have a GitHub link.
Yeah, we have the code on GitHub to kind of show y'all what it's done, but I can quickly code up like what it would look like. So you want to make a new folder called src, and then inside of src you want to make a new file called your component. So I'm gonna call it mylego.js, and you would have to import use state from React. So this is using React stuff, and then you need to import view and text from React Native. Okay, and then to make a component, you basically need to do export function mylego, or export default function, and I would recommend y'all to research what default means. Mylego, and then you want to put in props, right? And then in every React component, to render it, you have to return it. And to actually use components, it's actually like HTML, so like view, text, my Lego is, and then let's say that there's a red color, so props dot color, and it has a count of count, and count is not defined yet, so we'll define it right now. So to define those variables, I'm going to do this const count, set count, which are ways to, this is the state basically. Count is the actual value of the state. Set count lets you change the state. That's equal to use state. Use state, and the very first thing in there is the initial value. Okay, and then under that you want to make a button. Oh shoot. Hopefully I can do this fast enough. Make sure you import button, and then inside a button you want to add a title, name it, press me, and then you want to add a event handler, which takes a function, and that function will set the count to the current count plus 1. So it sets a count by 1 each time you press it. And then what you should see is that you should see the color of your Lego and the count that it has. And then when you go up to app.json, you have to import it. Import my Lego from the source file, so mylego.js, right? And then you have to use your component. So my Lego, and then you have to pass it a color. So color is equal to red, right? So that sets it to a red color, and it has a default count of 0, and it should be a Lego that counts up and down, right? Props.color. And then now, for the very last moment of truth, to actually run the code, you have to type expo yarn start.
Oh, did
And-
you cover the installing yarn?
What?
You have to also install yarn. Did you cover that?
Oh my goodness. You have to install yarn with npm install -g. Good catch. So you have to do this before this. -g yarn, like this. So pretend like that just happened, and now you do yarn start. And then from there, you would take your phone, scan this QR code on your laptop, and you should see your app. But in this case, I'll show you what the app would look like if, on the web. So here, yeah, Lego, my Lego's red, and then you can count it multiple times. And just to show y'all even more power, paste a bunch of these, maybe change one color to blue. So now you're making stuff dynamic, and then now you're able to basically keep independent states of all these Legos, and that's it. Hopefully that was 1 minute over. Okay, thanks y'all for staying a little bit, but yeah, that should be it. Do y'all? I know that was really fast and a lot just happened, so definitely ask questions on Discord, and there's stuff on YouTube, but I'm definitely down to like stay back and just explain stuff to y'all if y'all want. But other than that, we good. Yeah, and here's the code for reference. Thank you. I can't believe I missed the 9 thing. I would have started rushing earlier. Dang.